Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Today, we're heading over to Asia, where some really interesting, almost contradictory stuff is happening.
Oh, definitely.
We're seeing travel warnings pop up for South Korea, and yet, at the same time, Sharjah's real estate market is, well, it's booming.
Yeah, it's quite a contrast.
It is, and that's what we're going to try to make sense of today. Like,
Yeah.
what's going on with these trends and how they could, impact you, the listener.
Right, because it's not just about what's happening over there, but also, what it means for the bigger picture.
Exactly. So let's dive right in, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, so South Korea first. We're seeing these travel warnings from places like the British Foreign Office basically saying, hey, be careful if you're heading there.
Mm-hmm.
It's all tied to the political situation after President Yoon's impeachment. There are protests and, a general sense of, I don't know, instability.
Yeah, and that's a big deal because a lot of people might not realize how much political stuff can affect, like, everyday life, even if you're just visiting.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So can you give us some more background on what led to the impeachment and, like, why it's causing such a stir?
Well, from what I've been reading, it seems like the whole thing has really divided the public. You've
Ah,
got people who are really strongly for the impeachment and then others who are, like, completely against it.
I see.
And that kind of strong division, it tends to spill out onto the streets. Hence the protests and I guess the sense that things could escalate.
Yeah, you can see how that would make some governments nervous enough to issue warnings.
Definitely. And we have to remember, South Korea isn't the only place dealing with this kind of thing. We've seen it in other countries recently too, right?
Oh, for sure.
And it often leads to problems, economic downturns, tourism takes a hit. It's not pretty.
Not at all. And speaking of the warnings, I know they specifically mentioned a couple of areas to be extra cautious in.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Gwangwamun and the Constitutional Court, if I remember correctly.
Yes, exactly. So basically, if you're planning a trip to South Korea anytime soon, or even thinking about it, I mean, you've got to be really careful.
That's good advice.
Like, stay updated on the news, avoid any big crowds, and honestly, make sure your travel insurance covers political unrest.
Right, because that's not always a standard thing.
Nope. And it's also worth thinking about, what kind of trip you're taking.
What do you mean?
Well, like, a business trip might have different risks compared to, say, a vacation, right? So the precautions you take might need to be adjusted accordingly.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's South Korea, a bit of let's say, a cautious situation.
Yes.
But then we jump over to Sharjah,
Hmm.
and it's almost like stepping into a completely different world.
It really is.
While there's uncertainty in South Korea, their real estate market is, exploding. What's driving that kind of growth?
Well, the numbers are pretty mind-blowing. Last year, in 2024, Sharjah saw something like a 48% jump in property transactions compared to the year before.
Whoa, that's a huge jump.
Right. And that added up to a total of about 40 billion. Even Dubai, which is usually seen as the big real estate hub in the UAE, only saw growth in the 20 to 25% range.
Wow, so Sharjah is really outpacing everyone.
Oh yeah, big time.
And what's interesting to me is that it's not just people from the UAE investing there.
Yeah, that's one of the really fascinating things about this. We're talking about over 120 nationalities putting their money into Sharjah.
That's incredible.
It is. Of course, Emirati investors are still the biggest group, but then you've got a ton of people from India, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Pakistan. It's a really diverse mix.
Yeah, it really seems like they're attracting interest from all over the place. And there's that other number that I thought was really telling, the $10 billion in mortgages that were taken out in 2024.
Right.
I mean, that says something, doesn't it? Like, people are willing to make these big long-term commitments to Sharjah's market.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of that has to do with the feeling of, well, stability.
Ah,
Sharjah's been working really hard to diversify its economy, moving away from just relying on oil. They've been putting in place these business-friendly policies, strong regulations, and that kind of thing.
so it's like a safer bet for investors.
In a way, yeah. I mean, especially when you contrast it with what's going on in South Korea, where things are a bit unpredictable politically, which can lead to, like, sudden changes in economic policies.
That makes a lot of sense. So I guess the question now is this sustainable?
Hmm.
Given what's going on in South Korea, could Sharjah be heading for a bubble?
That's a really important question, and honestly, there's no easy answer. I mean, yeah, the growth is impressive, but there are definitely potential things that could cause problems.
Like what?
Well, global oil prices are still a big factor in that region. If those were to drop significantly, it could shake investor confidence.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, Sharjah's efforts to diversify, those help to balance things out a bit.
So I guess it's all about being cautious and doing your homework.
Pretty much. Anyone thinking about investing there needs to really understand the market and be prepared for the long haul.
Okay, so to sum it up, we've got these two very different stories playing out in Asia. South Korea, where political uncertainty is, a real concern even for travelers, and Sharjah, where the opposite seems to be happening.
Yeah, it's like two sides of the same coin.
It
Yeah.
is. And it really makes you think about those bigger questions, like how these trends could spread and affect, well, everything.
Definitely. I mean, the world is so interconnected now that what happens in one place can really have a ripple effect everywhere else.
It's a good reminder to stay informed, not just about the individual events, but like you said, the bigger picture.
And the potential consequences, yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's all the time we have for our deep dive today. But as you go about your week, we want to leave you with something to think about. How do you think other big global events might create similar situations in the future? And what can you do to stay ahead of the curve, whether it's your travel plans or your investment strategy?
Always good to keep those things in mind.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.